The guard who opened the Queen's private closet. The rain had not stopped for 3 days over Aldwyn Palace. It fell in thin, steady sheets, tapping against the tall windows of the West Wing, where the halls were quiet at night, and the only sound was the echo of boots on old marble floors. Daniel Hart walked those halls every night. He was 26 years old, tall, with a calm face that rarely showed what he was thinking. He had been a palace guard for almost 3 years now, and in that time, he had learned one important thing. The palace had more secrets than any single person could ever know. Some secrets belonged to the royal family. Others belonged to the walls themselves. Daniel's shift usually started at 10 in the evening and ended at 6 in the morning. It was quiet work, mostly. He walked the same corridors, checked the same doors, nodded to the same night staff. But Daniel didn't mind the silence. In some strange way, he liked it. The palace at night felt like it belonged to him. That night was different, though he didn't know it yet. It started with a storm. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the old windows, and somewhere on the second floor, in a part of the palace that was rarely used, a section of the roof let in water. Daniel was called to check it, along with 2 maintenance workers. They walked through a wing that most staff simply called the old rooms, a quiet stretch of the palace where the previous queen consort, Queen Margarethe, had lived for over 40 years before she passed away 6 years ago. Nobody used these rooms anymore. They were kept clean out of respect, but the doors mostly stayed locked. Daniel had walked past them 100 times without a second thought. But tonight, because of the leak, one of the workers needed to move an old wooden cabinet that stood against a wall. Behind it was a narrow door, painted the same pale cream color as the wall, so well hidden that it looked like part of the wall itself. Daniel had never noticed it before. "What's that?" one of the workers asked. Daniel walked over and tried the handle. Locked. He checked his master ring of keys, the one every senior guard carried during night shifts for emergencies like fires or floods. None of the keys fit. "Leave it," the older maintenance worker said. "Not our problem tonight. We're here for the roof, not old doors." Daniel agreed, and they moved on. But something about that door stayed in his mind. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something else, a feeling he couldn't explain, like the door was familiar to him, even though he had never seen it before. He thought about it the rest of the night, and when his shift ended at 6 in the morning, instead of going home to sleep, he found himself standing in front of that same door again, alone in the quiet morning light. Daniel's mother had once worked in this palace. She had passed away 4 years ago, but before that, she had spent almost 15 years as a member of the household staff, back when Queen Margarethe was still alive. Daniel had grown up hearing small stories about the palace, nothing detailed, nothing that broke any rules, just soft memories his mother would share sometimes in the evening. She never said much about her work. She always said the palace asked for privacy, and she respected that. But there was one thing she used to say, again and again, almost like a habit. "The Queen was kind to me when no one else was." She never explained what she meant. Daniel had asked her many times growing up, but she always changed the subject, smiling gently and saying, "Some things are better left where they belong." Daniel hadn't thought about that phrase in years. But standing in front of this hidden door, it came back to him clearly, like a whisper from the past. He decided to ask about the door properly, through the right channels, instead of trying to open it himself. That would have been against the rules, and Daniel was not someone who broke rules easily. The next day, he went to see Mr. Whitlock, the palace's record keeper. Mr. Whitlock was an older man, nearing 70, who had worked in the palace archives for over 30 years. He knew almost everything about the building's history, every room, every renovation, every small detail that most people never noticed. "Fadiver, a hidden door in the old West Wing," Mr. Whitlock repeated, adjusting his glasses. "Behind the wooden cabinet in Queen Margarethe's old sitting room." "Yes, sir." Mr. Whitlock was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. That would be her private closet. It was sealed after she passed, on request of the family. Nobody has opened it in 6 years. Why was it sealed? I don't know the full reason, Mr. Whitlock admitted. I was told it was personal. Family matters. The kind of thing we don't ask questions about. Daniel nodded, though inside, his curiosity only grew stronger. Is there a key somewhere, in case of emergencies, like the roof leak? Mr. Whitlock studied him for a long moment. There is. It's kept with the household management office. But Daniel, I would be careful. Some doors are closed for a reason, and it's not our place to open them just because we're curious. Daniel understood. He thanked Mr. Whitlock and left, telling himself he would drop the matter. But 2 days later, fate made the decision for him. The storm from earlier that week had caused more damage than anyone realized. A pipe above the old west wing had cracked, and water had slowly been leaking into the walls for days. When the household staff finally discovered it, they realized the water damage was spreading toward Queen Margaret's old sitting room and toward that same hidden closet. An emergency order came down. Every room in that section needed to be checked immediately, including any locked or sealed spaces, to prevent damage to anything valuable inside. Daniel, being the guard already familiar with the area, was assigned to accompany the household manager, a stern but fair woman named Mrs. Bellamy, to open the closet and check its contents. This time, it wasn't curiosity, it was duty. Mrs. Bellamy arrived with the key, her face serious. "We're only here to check for damage," she said firmly, mostly to herself. "Nothing more." She unlocked the door. It opened with a soft creak, releasing a smell of old fabric and faint lavender, the kind of scent that lingers in a room untouched for years. Inside was a small closet, not very large, lined with soft shelves and a single hanging rail. Most of the shelves were empty, holding only a few boxes and folded cloths. But on the hanging rail, protected in a clear garment bag, was a single robe. It was pale ivory in color, with delicate embroidery along the edges, small flowers stitched by hand, careful and precise. It didn't look grand or overly royal. It looked personal, worn, loved. Mrs. Bellamy stepped closer, her expression softening. "I remember this," she said quietly. "This was Queen Margaret's. She wore it often, in private, never in public." Daniel stood frozen, staring at the robe. Something about it felt strangely familiar, though he couldn't say why. Mrs. Bellamy carefully checked the shelves and boxes for water damage. Thankfully, the leak hadn't reached the closet yet, though the ceiling corner nearby was damp. She instructed Daniel to help her move the robe and the boxes to a dry storage room temporarily, just as a precaution, while repairs were being made. As Daniel gently lifted the garment bag holding the robe, something small slipped out from a fold near the sleeve and fell to the floor. He bent down to pick it up. It was an old photograph, slightly faded, along with a folded piece of paper. Mrs. Bellamy hadn't noticed. She was busy checking the boxes. Daniel quickly looked at the photograph before placing it back carefully. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, standing beside someone who was clearly a much younger Queen Margaret. The young woman in the photo looked strikingly familiar. It was his mother. Daniel's chest tightened. He stared at the photo for a long moment, his mind racing. Why would his mother be in a personal photograph, hidden inside the Queen's private closet, tucked into her most cherished robe? He didn't say anything to Mrs. Bellamy. He simply placed the photograph and the folded paper carefully back where he found them, finished helping with the move, and returned to his duties as though nothing unusual had happened. But that night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The next few days passed slowly for Daniel. He carried out his duties as usual, walking the quiet halls, checking the doors, nodding to the staff. But his mind kept returning to that photograph. His mother, young and smiling, standing beside the old queen. He wanted answers, but he didn't know who to ask, or if he even had the right to ask at all. It was Mrs. Bellamy who eventually approached him, about a week later. She found him during a quiet afternoon shift change and asked him to step aside for a private word. "You saw something in that closet," she said gently. "I noticed you go still when you picked up the garment bag." Daniel hesitated, but there was something in Mrs. Bellamy's expression, not suspicion, but understanding, that made him decide to tell the truth. "There was a photograph," he said quietly, "of a young woman with the Queen. I think it was my mother." Mrs. Bellamy's face changed. She looked at him carefully, as though seeing him for the first time. "What was your mother's name?" "Alice Hart." Mrs. Bellamy was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed, and something like relief crossed her face, as if a weight she had carried for a long time had finally been shared with someone else. "I worked with your mother," she said, "a long time ago, before you were born. I was young then too, new to the household staff. Your mother and I started around the same time." Daniel's heart beat faster. "Please," he said, "tell me what you know." Mrs. Bellamy glanced around to make sure they were alone, then continued in a lower voice. "There was a fire," she said, "a small one but dangerous. It happened in the staff quarters, many years ago, before renovations made those areas safer. Your mother was trapped in a hallway when the smoke got too thick. Most of the senior staff had already evacuated, but the Queen Margareta, she was in the building that night, visiting the staff quarters for reasons nobody fully understood. She heard someone shouting and went back in." Daniel felt his breath catch. "She found your mother," Mrs. Bellamy continued, "helped her out through the smoke, wrapped her in whatever she could find nearby to keep her from breathing in too much smoke and to keep her warm afterward, since your mother's own clothes had been ruined. It happened to be a robe the Queen had been wearing that evening, only a simple, private one, nothing formal." "The robe in the closet," Daniel said softly. Mrs. Bellamy nodded. "The Queen never spoke about it publicly. She didn't want praise or attention. She made sure your mother received proper care, quietly saw to it that she kept her position and was looked after, and asked the rest of us never to speak of it outside the household. It was kept private, out of respect for your mother as much as anything else. Nobody wanted it turned into some big story for the newspapers." Daniel felt his eyes sting unexpectedly. All those years, his mother's quiet words, "The Queen was kind to me when no one else was," finally made sense. "Why did she keep that robe locked away all these years?" Daniel asked. "Because it mattered to her," Mrs. Bellamy said simply. Queen Margaretha wasn't someone who cared much for grand jewelry or public honors, but small, quiet moments of real kindness. Those she treasured. I think that robe reminded her of a night when she did something that truly mattered, away from all the formality of her position, something real. Daniel didn't know what to say. He thought of his mother, who had passed away without ever fully explaining this story, perhaps keeping her promise of privacy until the very end. There was also a letter, Daniel admitted quietly, folded inside the bag. Mrs. Bellamy's eyebrows rose slightly. "A letter? I didn't see any letter." "I didn't read it," Daniel said honestly. "It wasn't mine to read. I put it back." Mrs. Bellamy looked at him for a long moment, something like respect settling into her expression. That was the right thing to do. A few days later, the household office informed Daniel that the current Queen consort, Queen Isabel, wished to see him personally. Daniel's stomach turned nervous circles the entire walk to her private study. Guards were rarely summoned individually unless something serious had happened, and Daniel couldn't help but worry he had done something wrong. But when he entered the study, Queen Isabel's expression was warm, not stern. She was a calm woman in her 50s, known throughout the palace for her quiet, thoughtful nature. "Please, sit," she said gently, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Daniel sat, still unsure of what this meeting was about. "Mrs. Bellamy told me what happened," Queen Isabel said, "about the closet, about your mother." Daniel's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to intrude, Your Majesty. It happened by accident, during the emergency inspection." "I know," she said kindly. "You're not in any trouble, Daniel. Quite the opposite." She reached into a drawer and pulled out the small folded letter Daniel had seen days earlier. "I read this," she said, "after Mrs. Bellamy told me what you found." Daniel waited quietly. Queen Margaretha wrote this letter shortly before she passed. Queen Isabel continued. She wrote it to whoever might eventually find that robe, long after she was gone. She knew one day someone would open that closet. Queen Isabel unfolded the letter gently and read a small portion aloud, her voice soft and careful. There are many things I did as queen that people will remember. Ceremonies, speeches, official visits. But the moment I am proudest of happened quietly, in a smoke-filled hallway, when I helped a frightened young woman find her way to safety. I want whoever finds this robe to know that true kindness rarely asks for an audience. If Alice's family ever finds this, please know she was more than a member of staff to me. She was someone I deeply respected, and I never forgot that night. Daniel felt tears gather in his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. Your mother never told you this story fully, did she? Queen Isabel asked gently. Daniel shook his head. She always said some things were better left where they belonged. Queen Isabel smiled softly. That sounds like a woman who understood the true meaning of loyalty and respect, both her and Queen Margaretha. There was a quiet pause between them. The palace had been planning to sort through some of Queen Margaretha's private belongings for the family archive, and possibly for a small memorial exhibit, Queen Isabel explained. Many items don't have much personal history attached to them anymore, sadly, since so much time has passed. But this robe, this one has a real story behind it. I would like it preserved properly, and I would like your family acknowledged, quietly, in the archive records, if that is something you would be comfortable with. Daniel nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak clearly. I think my mother would have liked that. Quietly done, nothing grand. Then quietly it shall be, Queen Isabel said warmly. In the weeks that followed, the robe was carefully preserved and placed in the palace's private historical archive, alongside a small, respectful note about the night it had been worn. The true story behind it, kept simple and dignified, exactly as both women involved would have wanted. Daniel didn't ask for recognition, and none was given publicly. But something inside him had changed. He no longer just walked the palace halls as a guard doing his nightly rounds. He walked them knowing that somewhere within those old walls, his mother's quiet strength and a queen's private kindness were forever connected, a small hidden story of loyalty that had waited patiently for the right person to find it. Sometimes, late at night, when the palace was silent and the rain returned softly against the windows, Daniel would pass by that same hallway in the old West Wing. He would slow his steps for just a moment, remembering. Not every important story in a palace happens on a grand stage, in front of crowds or cameras. Some of the most meaningful ones happen quietly, in locked closets and old hallways, waiting patiently for years, until someone finally opens the right door.